to you all, ladies and gentlemen, both who are here in the room at the Serena in Kampala, and those who are joining and participating remotely, that's participating online. My name is Bernard Tabaire, and I'll be the MC this morning. I'd like to welcome you to Country Diagnostic Update and the Performance and Learning Review for Uganda. I trust it will be a worthwhile morning and afternoon, part of the afternoon. We will have the welcome remarks by the country manager. Then we will have a presentation on these two documents. Then we will have a panel discussion. And finally, we will close with closing remarks again from the country manager. So to formally get us started, I'd like to invite the World Bank country manager for Uganda, Ms. Mukami Kariuki, to come and deliver her opening remarks. Thank you very much, Mukami.
Thank you and good morning, everybody. And agencies present here and online. Development partners, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to warmly welcome you all to this event today, and also to thank you for taking the time to be here to give us your support and also to give us your inputs on the systematic country diagnostic update and also the performance and learning review. Let me start by giving you a brief context on how the World Bank in Uganda engages, and also similarly the way that the World Bank works on these types of initiatives in other countries. So every 5 years, we prepare a country partnership framework which outlines the priorities the World Bank will support in the country of its work, in this case, Uganda. In the course of the 5-year period, we also undertake a performance and learning review to ensure that we take into account new developments, identify challenges, and adapt accordingly. For the current 2016 to 2021 CPF, and if I may remove my mask, it's a bit hot. For the current 2016 to 2021 CPF, we undertook a performance and learning review over the last year, making the necessary adjustments to ensure that the CPF, our country partnership framework, remains focused and relevant in the current context, particularly given emerging priorities such as those that emerged through the COVID pandemic. In 2021, we also began the process of preparing our next country partnership framework by completing a systematic country diagnostic. This is an exercise that we undertake to take the temperature of a country at a particular moment in time, and it aims to identify the key challenges and opportunities for accelerating a country's progress towards its development objectives. As we come to the end of the 2016 to 2021 country partnership framework, we're also undertaking a completion and learning review, which will build on lessons learned from the PLR, the performance and taking into account the main constraints identified by the SCD and also the World Bank's comparative advantage, but remaining consistent with the World Bank's twin goals of ending absolute poverty and boosting shared prosperity in a sustainable manner. All of these reports are prepared by the World Bank Group in close consultation with national authorities and other stakeholders, and are intended to be a reference point for consultations on the priorities that will commence shortly in preparation of the CPF. So we will be coming back to you as we start the consultation process to identify priorities for our support. In addition to the PLR, or Performance Learning Review, the systematic country diagnostic update that we're launching today, and there are other key inputs that we feed into the CPF process. And one of these is the country private sector diagnostic, which you may have noted we recently launched with the IFC. It is an assessment of opportunities and constraints to private sector-led growth, and it also provides analytical underpinnings and emerging lessons to inform the CPF. As the previous CPF was aligned with Uganda's second National Development Plan, NDP2, the upcoming one will be aligned with NDP3, whose goal is to increase average household incomes and improve the quality of life of Ugandans. Achievement of this goal assumes that sustained peace, security, good governance, and a stable macroeconomic environment will continue to prevail, and that these will provide the basic anchor for economic growth and development under this plan. The government will soon embark on a midterm review of the NDP3. I think the process has already started, and findings from this exercise will also be used to inform the CPF. Whereas we prepare a CPF in partnership with government, we also conduct extensive consultations with all of you, the private sector, civil society, think tanks, academia, media, trade, unions, faith organizations, youth, women's group, parliament, and others, to ensure that we have substantive inputs to guide the priorities identified for our support. The team will be reaching out to you in the coming months, and we hope to have your support in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, the World Bank has been in Uganda since 1964 and looks forward to being a key partner in supporting Uganda's vision of becoming a transformed society from a peasant to a modern and prosperous country by 2040. Since the 2015 SCD, both the global and Ugandan contexts have changed significantly. Despite Uganda achieving economic progress and a reduction in poverty, the COVID-19 crisis has reversed some of these developments. As a result, the size and composition of the World Bank's portfolio differs significantly from that laid out in the previous CPF program, and in fact, some of the figures also differ from those in our performance and learning review since it was conducted a year ago. Under the performance learning review, substantive adjustments were made, and the CPF was extended to the end of fiscal year 2022, this year, in other words, based on the emerging lessons and also to respond to COVID-19 challenges. Additionally, we wanted to align with the ongoing deepening of World Bank Group support globally for human capital development, economic inclusion, and social and physical resilience in support of the IDA 19 commitments. So IDA 19 is our funding cycle, 3-year funding cycle that we normally use to determine the projects that we support in the CPF. Through flexible and innovative approaches, the World Bank has found opportunities to support an expansion of human capital investments in Uganda. The Uganda portfolio is also gradually being adjusted towards a more transformational impact on the twin goals, including utilizing performance-based financing for service delivery and scaling interventions that have demonstrated impact by growing the average size of operations. So we're trying to have impact at scale and therefore larger operations that reach more people across the country. the series of challenges that were identified over the CPF period, the program is also focusing on improving both physical resilience through land management and urban development, and social resilience with better social risk management, expanded social protection, and a multi-sectoral response to forced displacement, as well as renewed attention to women's empowerment. Finally, the country program has broadened the engagement of governance through enhanced analysis, which together have allowed the re-establishment of a reform agenda for Uganda. The results framework has been amended, data sources that will help us reviewed and tried to streamline the priority areas and proposed actions from the 2015 SCD. So in other words, for the just ending country partnership framework, we conducted a systematic country diagnostic in 2015. And so the one that we're updating now will streamline the priority areas and proposed actions. It builds on the analysis conducted at this time, but also provides a fresh perspective to assess the development challenges and opportunities in Uganda over the next 5 years. It's also considered the recent impact of COVID-19 and gives prominence to issues that have become more significant as a result of the impact of the pandemic. To resume a path to inclusive growth and poverty reduction over the medium term, Uganda needs to create sufficient and quality jobs by accelerating a sustainable and inclusive economic transformation. To do this, the SCD update proposes 5 broad areas that should be given priority in Uganda over the next few years. The first is macro-fiscal stability. A second one is governance and service delivery. A third is human development and women's empowerment, agricultural commercialization, and private sector competitiveness. My colleagues Richard Walker, Franklin Mutahakana, and Eva Liskrawet will provide further details on the above points and take you through some of the key findings from both reports. Thereafter, I look forward to the panel discussion and to the many discussions that we'll have during the consultations over the course of this year in the, preparation for the new World Bank Group Country Partnership Framework for the period 2023 to 28. Thank you very much, and I cede the floor to the MC.
Thank you very much, Mukami, for the opening remarks. And as she said, we are moving next to the presentation on the 2 documents. And it's going to be a relay sort of presentation with Richard starting off, handing off to Eva, and then Eva handing off to Franklin, who I believe will hand back to Richard. But those who came in earlier, you have access to the question, the link to the question. So please answer after Richard's presentation, the first part of the presentation. Thank you very much. Richard?
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm just waiting for the presentation to come up. 1 second, I think they're saying. Yeah, I mean, just to repeat that, I mean, the SCD is really the opportunity to just pause for a moment and have a look at the challenges and opportunities in the country, specifically around issues related to growth, poverty, inequality, and sustainability. And also just to say that, to some extent, it is independent from, or we try to keep it independent from maybe necessarily World Bank views. It's supposed to really help inform many stakeholders. And from the SCD update, we would then draw from that for our country partnership framework. So what you see in the SCD update, at least in my second presentation, is not all of that will be in the country partnership framework. You'll find aspects of that will be drawn. we're just waiting for the presentation. Maybe also just to say, I mean, the first part of my presentation is really just giving a context. I mean, it's quite a quick run through of the context. It's really trying to look at the last, say, 5 years up to prior the COVID crisis, and then a snapshot of what happened during COVID. So, look, there are a lot of points I don't touch on. It's just to give you a general flavor, but obviously a lot of more of the analysis is in the document. Okay, you can't see the slides, but I'll just start so long and hopefully they can catch us up. Yeah, maybe I won't go into as much detail, but just to give you a flavor of what was there in terms of the context. So I think the first trend we found is that Uganda's population has grown by about 20% since 2015. This is up to 2020, and will grow substantially over the next 40 years, which will present significant new development challenges. The chart I wanted to show really gave a sense of up to 2060 in terms of how the population growth will look, and a breakdown by the share of population. And I think the key point there was just to say, that just to show this real significant growth in working age population over the next, say, 40 years. And as a result, this requirement to really find job opportunities for this working age population. Unfortunately, what we do see, though, is if on current, say, conditions, how we see the labor market entrance coming in at this stage versus the opportunities that are being created. Okay, we're there now. Yeah, so this chart to the right, at the moment, this gap between labor force entrance and employment is about 7.8 million. And if you stay at current conditions, this will increase to about 25 million by 2050. So it's quite a substantial increase, and I think this is one of the key challenges right now, is to find jobs, productive jobs for these people. And an important point to note is that one of the key, say, conditions is investing in human capital to help make this happen. Another trend is that although per capita real GDP growth slowed between FY15 and FY19, the economy had started to rebound before the COVID crisis. This chart just gives a sense of per capita growth over the last decade. The dotted lines give an average for those 5-year periods. You can see a drop from about 2% on average in the first part of the decade to about 1%. As I said, I mean, there was this rebound moving into COVID. FY18-19 growth rates went back up to about 6.5%, which would have increased per capita growth. But unfortunately, during the COVID crisis, this has dropped to around 3.5% on average. It is expected to increase to about 6%, just under, over the next few years. But there's much uncertainty to this outlook. Firstly, the pandemic, what that might mean going forward on a number of aspects. Of course, there's, combined with this now, there's the crisis in Ukraine, the impact combined with the pandemic and the crisis in Ukraine on global commodity prices, trade, remittances, travel, tourism, all aspects that are important for the Uganda economy. And then finally, increase in poverty between, say, 2015 and 16, which is the data points we have. So leading into the old SED, it appears that increase was temporary, and with robust consumption growth returning across all income groups leading into the COVID crisis. This chart on the left, you can see the blue line showing this increase in poverty up to about just over 21% in 2016. Chart on the right shows the consumption growth between 2015 and 19, and you can see across all income groups how there was positive growth, although lower for those at the lower end of the spectrum, but still positive, and as a result, welfare of households would have improved. This was confirmed later on, I'll come back to that, with the household survey data in 2020-21. I think what was also interesting for 2018, 2019, just before the COVID crisis, was driven really by improvements in the labor market, was accompanied by improvements in the labor market and driven really by the non-farm sector. You saw people moving from services, moving into services and industry. Now this chart, I'll focus on shows the national, urban and rural breakdown. If you look at the left-hand two columns, you see how that green share dropped. There was this increase in those working in services and then industry as well, the orange segment. And also if you looked at national accounts data, you can certainly see how that industrial sector, year-on-year growth was really improving quite significantly in double digits up until the COVID crisis. So what this was telling us really was that this budding structural transformation was starting to happen. At the same time, though, we certainly saw this deterioration in fiscal and debt sustainability, largely driven by poor tax performance as well as public investment management challenges. Chart on the left just shows how, compared to the flat line, which is the gray line, that's revenue as a percentage of GDP, the orange line really took off, which is expenditure as a percentage of GDP. And as a result, this expansion in the fiscal deficit, and again, you see this rise in public debt quite significantly to around 50% in FY21. In this period as well, Uganda slipped from being at low risk of debt distress to moderate risk of debt distress. The middle chart just gives a sense of this poor tax performance. The bars at the bottom show Uganda right at the bottom there, 2000 to 2014, and then Uganda, the red one, the second one up, 2015 to 18. There wasn't much change in terms of a share of tax as a percentage of GDP, around 11-12% on average in those years. This compares to some of the comparators. You see the Sub-Saharan Africa line there, and also you look at, I'm looking at Kenya, Rwanda, the second and third from the top, around about 16% revenue generation as a share of GDP. And then just to really make the point in terms of the public investment challenges, there are several of them, but you look at the public investment execution rate. This is broken down by a number of sectors. I think the overall point here is that for the NDP1 period, which are the gray bars, there certainly was a general deterioration compared to the NDP2 period, which are the orange bars. And public implementation plan execution was only about 55% of what was planned in that NDP2 period. And as a result, the accumulation of say, infrastructure assets really has not matched the significant capital budget allocation. And then think, on the other hand, there's also been this borrowing to finance a lot of these projects. So is Uganda getting the return from this borrowing? What you also see is that governance challenges and natural resource depletion continued. Just two charts on the left there. This is perceptions of government effectiveness and control of corruption. Might be a little hard to see, but the black line is Uganda. So it's generally this deteriorating trend in perception of government effectiveness, as well as not much change, quite low down and stagnation in terms of control of corruption. What we do point out in the report is that there are sort of some positive aspects here that can be built on. And one of them I would flag is around e-procurement, which is picking up more speed. And I think that can certainly support a better governance environment. I think the other thing I'll flag, and that will come up later, my other colleagues will mention, is trying to deliver services closer to the people and providing these incentives for improving results. Now, because of a number of factors which are highlighted there, environmental policies not being implemented, weak coordination, rising rural density, increasing pressure on the land, poor agricultural methods and lack of sustainable land management, this has really led to this natural resource depletion. A few things are flagged there. Level of land degradation, the cost to around 17% of GDP in 2019, the estimate. The drop in forest cover from about almost 20% in 2000 to about 12% in 2015. This is really some of the latest numbers we had. And also the significant loss of wetlands and rise in air pollution. And a lot of this is just going to be exacerbated by climate change, given the strain on natural resources. Now, just coming up quickly to the COVID period, what we found that the COVID crisis has really exacerbated some of these existing challenges. So showing the impact on poverty. Just prior to poverty would be the little increased and above where it was in 2016-17. The other point that was of note is that people seem to shift back to agriculture. Again, the green segment of these columns is agriculture. The left is pre-COVID, the middle is after the first lockdown, the right is after the second lockdown. So there was a significant movement after the first lockdown. People seem to come back into culture remains low, and the continued capacity for this sector to be a social safety net is highly uncertain. Again, also it goes against that trend of structural transformation that we'd seen before the crisis. And a final point to flag here is just the impact on businesses and family revenues, particularly at the smaller type businesses. The blue columns really, so the blue columns are in April 21, so before the second lockdown. The orange are in November 21. Just to say, what's shown here is the sort of the percentage of households reporting that they were earning less compared to the previous survey, which this is the Uganda High Frequency Phone Survey. Just to note, though, that in April 2021, households were already worse off than pre-COVID, and you can see how much more worse off they became after the second lockdown. About 65% of households with family business basically saw revenues fall from all activities after the second wave. This basically is just leading to higher levels of vulnerability. And with these higher levels of vulnerability, poverty may rise further as population growth continues, as the economy takes time to recover, and the frequency of shocks increase. This chart on the left just gives a sense of the real per capita GDP and how it's changed trajectory since the start of the crisis, definitely on a lower trajectory. And it begs the question of how feasible now it is to reach the NDP3 goal of $1,300 per capita. What's concerning as well is given the comparative coverage of direct income support, cash transfers, so looking at the social protection system, only about 3% of the population receives some sort of support. I can't see when this was done. I think it was 2019-20. At that point, as production engaged in any learning activity at the end of 2021. You can see total about 35% of children were engaged. This drops to about 30% in rural areas and down to about 19% for the poorest households. Compared to pre-COVID, about 84% of children were in school. I'll leave it there. Oh no, one more point. Yeah, so that's the point here is that the impact on productivity and economic growth of these low levels of human capital will be quite stark, particularly when you look into the future and how the share of the working age population is going to increase. Yeah, so Eva will come on now and talk about the previous country partnership framework.
I have some people who came late, so when you start your second part, you can just remind them to go to the link and all of this. Yeah? Good morning, everyone. So I will take you through 2 or 3 main key highlights of this document. Whoops, the slides. So of this document, I think all of you have been able to get a copy from outside. This document was, as mentioned by the country manager, is a stock take that we do in the middle of the country partnership framework. Because of COVID, we've done it slightly a little bit later. So this was published this was finalized last year, and we're launching it herewith today. So 2 main, in that document, what we look at is we try to learn lessons, and then we use those lessons to inform the adjustments that we make at that time of the country partnership framework. And these lessons, we will then also now, we're doing the completion learning review. That's one slide too many. I'm learning right and left here. So from the lessons learned, we then are able to make adjustments to reflect the context in which the partnership framework, and we have also in collaboration with the government, we then make those adjustments. So just to kind of highlight the context in which this is all done is the CPF, the country partnership framework, was developed and is aligned with Uganda's goals and Uganda's vision, the vision to transform Uganda into a modern and prosperous nation by 2040. And that is underpinned by a number of national development plans. So at the time of the development of the CPF, the current CPF, there was the NDP2, and that had about 5 main priorities, which includes private sector, infrastructure, agriculture, a number of aspects. And the CPF was aligned to that. And then the new NDP3 came into, the National Development Plan 3 came into play, which further built on these 5 priorities. And you can see on the left-hand side, of the slide, the number of what the NDP3 goal is. It's to increase the average household incomes and to improve the quality of life of Ugandans. And to do that through 5 main areas of institutional capacity building, investments in infrastructure, the social well-being, which includes the human capital development, as well as the value addition, and then a very important critical aspect of the private sector capacity. So based on this, the CPF objectives were developed. They mainly focus on 3 focus areas, and you can see that on the right-hand side of the slide, is to strengthening governance, accountability, and service delivery, with 2 objectives underneath, raising income in rural areas, and boosting inclusive growth in the urban areas. So this is the alignment with the national goals. At the time of the PLR, when we assessed 7 out of so each of these objectives have 2 indicators, and at the time of the taking stock, 7 of the 12 indicators were on track. So this, even during the time of COVID, we were still able to do more than half of the things that we had planned, and in some other parts we had slower progress and we had some delays that were there. But still, we measured quite a positive progress at that time. So, as I mentioned, the PLR aims to kind of draw some lessons to then inform and to make the necessary adjustments. So a few key lessons that we've learned at the time of the PLR is that investing in social and environmental risk management pays off better and more sustainable outcomes. So there were a number of safeguards, issues or challenges that we looked at that time. And from the lessons, what we've learned is that we were able to understand the broader social and environmental risks, and then to strengthen the management systems, and both the government as well as the World Bank, and to make a more and a stronger systematic focus on compliance. So that was one of the lessons learned, and that is likely also going to continue and to continue inform also the next CPF. Another lesson learned that also came out very strongly, and which you will see from my colleague who will highlight the portfolio, is an entry point for the dialogue with women and women empowerment and girls empowerment. So that was also a strong lesson that was drawn from that and is currently being translated into operations. Another lesson which we drew at that time is flexible, creative, and practical responses can help to bridge challenging dynamics and deliver results. So I'll give you like two examples of that. One is financing health and education infrastructure and services through results-based approaches, and to strengthen the link between performance and financing to address local government financing and regional inequalities. So one example that we have there, one program, is the Uganda Intergovernmental Fiscal Transfers Program, or short. It's also something that we have been doing more and more, and there's been a number of launches that I'm sure many of you have been able to attend. The third lesson that we drew at that time was the crisis can clarify priorities, categorize collaborative responses, and build resilience. So Uganda has had a number of pandemic. There's also been like the Ebola in the past. It has a lot of experience with outbreaks. So when COVID hit, it was also one of the most strategic in the region, and it kind of looked at responding very rapidly and very effectively to the crisis. At the same time also, the COVID has had an impact on everything that happens across the world, but it has also allowed us to do business in a different way and to use the virtual space in a much more efficient and effective way. Like, for example, today we're having a blended event, right? So in the past, this would have been much more an in-person only, and today we're actually able to do virtual as well as in-person. So that was also one of the things. And similarly, also the refugee situation, where we're actually able to bring together humanitarian and development and work on that nexus, as well as to support through IDA resources, which are embedded into the pipeline, and a multi-sectorial and holistic approach to economic opportunities and access to services for both refugees as well as host communities. So that also kind of falls under that lesson learned. And two last lessons learned: a strategic and concerted communications effort promotes the learning, building, relationship, engenders buy-in, and helps to mitigate reputational risks. So there's been quite a lot of engagement with all of you, and that is definitely something that we will also, throughout the country partnership framework process, together with all of you, we're going to have and hold those discussions and to continue engage to make sure that your views and your perspectives are also included. And then a last lesson learned is investing in fewer and larger projects that have the potential to yield a more transformative impact. For this point, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Franklin Mutahakana. Am I saying that correctly, Franklin? Because I normally always address him as Franklin. So for this point, he will actually showcase by showing us the portfolio that we started shifting towards fewer and larger projects with a more strategic and focused response to have stronger results and impact. So here's my colleague, Franklin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eva. Good morning to the colleagues. I'll also beg to remove my mask For your information, I'm fully vaccinated, so at least we're all safe, at least from me. So in terms of the portfolio, okay, I also need to learn to use this thing. Sorry. This one? Yes. Ah, okay. Okay. Sorry about that. In terms of the portfolio, I'll start from the point that Eva left on, in terms of trying to have larger, fewer, and more transformative operations. To a large extent, we've tried our best to do that, and the process still continues. Of course, you'll appreciate that when the CPF was done, the last one that is coming to a close, we did have a portfolio already. So we carried over a significant portfolio, which was spread across very many sectors. Currently, when you look at the pie chart on your right, you will see that the spread is still significantly in a number of sectors, but increasingly these are being consolidated, and the focus also is being put towards very transformative activities, to the extent that the current portfolio, in terms of proportion, you find that the energy and the urban sectors are actually the biggest. In terms of energy, that comes consistent with what the government priorities would be, because given the fact that currently Uganda had what I would call almost an overproduction of power, the bank's focus has been on trying to assist the country to try and move this power, one, from sources of production to where it is going to be utilized. So in terms of supporting them with the transmission systems, but also the distribution to build the consumer network and the consumption of this power. So that's why we have that significant focus in the energy, and also a significant focus in the urban sector. In fact, one thing this particular pie chart doesn't show is a recent project that is going to our board next month, no, this month actually, which will be covering the greater Kampala, and that is Kampala, Mukono, Entebbe, Wakiso, and Mpigi, in terms of support for the institutional and infrastructure development, and that will significantly move the proportion for urban, I think, to about 26% of the portfolio. So increasingly, that is something that one has been trying to look at and see. But just to point out, our current portfolio, current commitment is about 4.8 billion to Uganda. And maybe I should have started by indicating that the bank's support in terms of how we deliver the country partnership framework is, in addition to financing, which most of the public is aware of, most of us are aware of the bank providing financing. The bank also supports that financing with technical support, advisory services to government, but also knowledge that helps support government's policy-making framework. So in that, the total commitment comes about 4.8 billion of what the bank has provided from financing. And these are highly concessional credits. We call them credits. They are loans, but in the bank's language, they're called credits. And a significant part of that is also in form of grant to the government. And then in terms of disbursement, that's where we've had a bit of a challenge, and I'm looking at the director here. We are working together with the Ministry of Finance specifically to try and address some of the challenges that have been faced in the process of implementation, because currently out of the 4.8, only about 38% has been disbursed. Now, with such a disbursement level, it means that a lot of the development objectives that are intended by these operations has actually not been achieved. And as such, there needs to be some work to be done to try and see that we can actually get these activities moving, the implementation of these projects moving, so that the intended objectives can actually be achieved. Now, when Eva mentioned the portfolio sizes, when you look at the PLR, you'll realize that at the time of the PLR, the average portfolio size was about 130. And we did have an opportunity to build it up, and I think it had gone to about 145. But then, of course, when COVID came in, there were a couple of emergency operations that had to come in place, and some of these were fairly small. So they did bring back the numbers a bit down to about 140 currently, which is still fairly significant and fairly good in terms of what average portfolio sizes we have. But the focus is to try and even build that a bit bigger than what we're looking at. And that's why I gave the examples of the urban operation that is coming up, which is about $560 million, with about 30% of that in grant form. So these are some of the activities that the bank uses to support the government's program for development. Now, again, in the presentation made by the country manager, she indicated that the bank's financing comes in cycles, and we're currently coming to the end of IDA 19, where Uganda had about $2 billion allocation to it, and out of that, we've been able to provide a number of support activities in various sectors. This particular IDA was, usually the cycle is 3 years, but in this particular case, to try and address the recovery in COVID and get ready to actually support countries as they go into post-COVID, the period was shortened to 2 years. And as such, the IDA 19 is ending on June 30th this year. And then we'll be starting the IDA 20 at that time. The estimated amount that Uganda is expected to get, this has not been confirmed, but this is in the range of about, again, 2 billion, both in form of credits that the country will get. And again, I will emphasize these are highly concessional credits. Now, the figures that the country gets are complemented by other activities. The other resources that we're able to mobilize, and specifically I want to talk about the resources that come from, just a minute, the resources that come from to support the refugee program that Uganda has. I think because of Uganda's very progressive refugee policy, the international community has recognized that and come together to provide the necessary support to ensure that, one, Uganda is cushioned from the impact that these refugees would have on its economy, but also help it to support the kind of development initiatives that it would put in place for these particular refugees. And in that context, under IDA 19 and IDA 18, the country was able to mobilize about $750 million. So that is over and above the IDA allocation that we had. And of that $750 million, I think about 85% of that was in grant form. And this has been spread across various activities and various projects. The strategy that the bank took in supporting the refugee program in Uganda, and when I say refugee, I also include the host communities, was not to come up with separate activities that specifically focus on these areas, but to align and integrate this kind of support within already existing and ongoing activities that are already supporting the national program as we go forward. And some of the examples include like support to the municipal development activities, support to the water sector, support to the education sector, and various other sectors to try and see that the country, in terms of its development agenda, has that kind of cushion, but is able to provide the necessary support to these particular programs or to these particular areas so that activities can move forward. Yeah, that's the slide I was actually talking about. Now, of course, with the COVID pandemic, with the current war problems that are currently being faced in Europe, there are risks that are inherently going to come across. And some of those risks specifically are in terms of shortages of these resources to support some of these programs, and one has to be mindful of some of these activities or some of these risks that are coming. So as we go forward in terms of developing the new country partnership framework, we'll be mindful of the various risks that we might have and the implications on the kind of resources that we'll be able to mobilize. On this note, I will call upon my colleague Richard, who will come back to continue with the presentation. Thank you very much. And apologies, I was a bit poor on the machine. I hope Richard is a lot better.
Before I get into this section, can you see on your screens the link? Yeah, so that link, this is where, as I go through this, we would like you to go to that link and please just answer the questions. It's a survey in terms of what you think the priorities are, your perspective on this, what I present. The instructions are there. If you could just put the link on your phone or other means, and then just go through it and reply. Apparently, there's been already about 15 people that have answered it, so you can still go back and edit if you want. It's not closed. It's coming up on the screen. Okay, there's the, sorry for the online people, I don't think you heard any of that. So please, can you go to this link, which is solido.com. Slido. S-L-I-D-O. SLIDO.com. That's the ID number there, and then the passcode. And as I said, so as I go through this presentation, or this part of the presentation on the priorities, we would really appreciate your inputs. If you can do the survey, give us your ideas, so that, and then afterwards we can present that back as well. So also, as I said earlier, I mean, the SCD update, we propose priorities and actions, which then the country partnership framework, the new one, is supposed to draw from to eventually formulate the final strategy for the World Bank over the next 5 years. Is everyone managing to get on in the room? I mean, generally, no. Slido, so, oh, there you are, slido.com. For the online people, we're just waiting a moment to see if generally people here can get onto that link. And then we'll move on with the presentation. Okay, maybe I think people are struggling to get onto the link. Please just take down it's the slido.com, take down the ID number and the passcode, and we'll update you as soon as it seems accessible. But for now, we'll move on with the presentation. So we're just loading the presentation. Okay, I'll get going again. So basically what you've heard already is a brief context of what really happened over the last, say, 5 to 7 years. And then you've also had a sense of the previous country partnership framework and the portfolio and where things are at. What I'll present now is really the the priority areas. So in the SCD update, there was the context in consultation with a lot of stakeholders, including civil society, private sector, government, others, including World Bank teams. We firstly looked at what are the focal areas to drill down in terms of more analytical work. And there were 4 of them. There was revenue mobilization, public investment management was one. There was agriculture, agro-processing, and jobs was another. Human capital and women's empowerment was a third. And then household and community resilience was the fourth. So on top of that context, we did also a significant amount of analysis into these areas, also drawing on a lot of reports and work that we've done over the last 5 to 7 years. And taking that all into account, in about, I think, April last year, we had external consultations to then rediscuss and present the priorities to you. And so what you'll see today is really what came out of that. All of that is to how we see, in order to boost growth, reduce poverty and inequality, and ensure sustainable development. These are what we see as the priorities for today. And if it helps, for those of you who have a copy of the report, in the executive summary, Roman numeral page 16, you'll see this, this diagram, and on the other side of the page 17, Roman numeral, you'll see what I come to in the subsequent slides, if it's just easier to help you follow. So just to say that, I mean, overall what we found was that Uganda's broad development narrative had not changed significantly since 2015. There were changes here and there, but overall the story stayed generally the same. What the COVID crisis did really was aggravate some of the existing challenges. So in terms of adjusting, on the left there you see that what was proposed, or what were the 2015 priority areas. There were, am I right, 8 of them. What we did was really try and focus that better, take into account some of the changes over the last few years, and we came down to 5 priority areas for this SCD update. The first one around macro fiscal stability, that remained. I mean, that is fundamental and critical to everything in Uganda, and I'll come to some more details on that shortly. The one in yellow in the right-hand chart, this governance and service delivery, that really was a combination of 2 from the SCD 2015. We had public sector service delivery and we had public sector effectiveness. And we refined that and really tried to focus on the importance of implementation governance for service delivery. Looking at the top of that circle, the human development and women's empowerment, that was a new one that was introduced, and really to reflect the deterioration in human outcomes over the last 5 to 7 years, the impact particularly of COVID on these sectors, education, health, and then also to emphasize the importance of women's empowerment, women economic empowerment. You'll see in the 2015 SCD, there was this priority around fertility reduction, which we actually thought was a very narrow way to approach a much bigger issue and much better encapsulated in broader women's empowerment. In the circle on the right, this one was a combination of 2. You'll see in the 2015, I won't read all the words, but there was one on agriculture and there was one on private sector. We basically decided to merge this into agriculture commercialization and private sector competitiveness. And this was really to try and acknowledge this critical link between the agriculture sector, private sector development, the potential of the private sector, and the potential for growth and exports, to ensure that it's seen as really one holistic value chain, and that it really must work together, and is a critical, I suppose, aspect or leg in enhancing growth and development in Uganda. Then finally, we introduced a new one here on green growth or sustainable urbanization and resilience. Green growth really was to reflect the importance of a lot of these issues over the last 5 to 7 years. You saw that slide on the depletion of natural resources. Sustainable urbanization builds on, there was in 2015 a priority area around urbanization, but I think it was really to, again, enhance the fact that urban areas in Uganda may not be fit for purpose at the moment in terms of driving development and growth, and there's certainly issues that need to be addressed. And then finally, resilience was brought in. In 2015, I think the term was consumption smoothing, But I think more holistically, there's this idea of resilience, of trying to ensure that communities and households are resilient to shocks. So that was quite a lengthy introduction on that slide. What I go through here now is on the page 17 in that executive summary, 17 Roman numerals. It's just under each of these priority areas are proposed key actions. Unfortunately, there's a lot of text here, so I'll just try and jump through it, but just so you have a sense. So on macro fiscal stability, of course, the important things are around improving revenue mobilization, and particularly with the potential for oil revenue to come on stream, to ensure that the institutions and processes are in place. Then it's around enhancing debt management, strengthening budget processes, credibility and compliance. So really trying to do away with these continual supplementary budgets, investment management and public procurement. And as I said, there's already a lot positive going on in that space to try and enhance the value for money in terms of public investments. The next priority around governance and service delivery, there were 6 key actions here. So looking at the demand side of governance, trying to improve the voice and accountability. At improving service delivery at the local government level. There's a lot of potential here. Improving management and oversight, but as well as the level of funding that's going, the adequacy, the equity of funding. Continuing to promote COVID-19 prevention and enhance the vaccination plan. There's uncertainty. For youth and women, and to implement laws and policies that promote women's economic empowerment, including land ownership. This was also another issue that came up a lot in our consultations, the need to really improve the ability for women to own land, which can support certainly the growth of their businesses and of course the improvement of the general household. This links to entrepreneurship, and then also empowering women in the household and reducing gender-based violence. Some of these issues became even more pronounced during the COVID crisis. Looking at green growth, sustainable urbanization, and resilience, there's 6 key actions proposed. First one is just around implementing some of the environmental policies and laws that are already in place. There's a lot of good policies and laws. It just requires better coordination amongst institutions and implementation. And also including issues around climate change adaptation into sector development plans and policies. Then there's certainly a continued need to prevent reverse land degradation, deforestation, wetland destruction, and also try to develop sectors such as, say, tourism, commercial forestry, that use these resources more sustainably. There's also a need to expand sustainable land, water, livelihood, management practices, and improve the incentives for landowners and farmers to adopt these practices. Need to improve urban planning, policies, capacities, issues related with land administration, coordination of institutions, to address these congestion and pollution issues, but as I said earlier, really to make urban areas fit for purpose, to drive development. Need to invest in road maintenance. I think this is something we've talked about a lot. Maintain assets that are built, don't let them deteriorate too fast. Invest in district rural roads. This is important for the sustainability and the resilience of those kind of communities. Urban transport systems to reduce the congestion. Trade corridors and a multimodal connectivity around Lake Victoria. There's a lot of potential there, not just the roads, but on the water, railway lines, putting it all together. And then finally, around resilience really is to enhance these shock responsive social protection systems, including, say, initially setting up a social or a registry, trying to understand who's vulnerable in what sectors and what shocks may affect them. Also, access to financial services, say like insurance for resilience, and better disaster risk management capacities. And finally, final priority area around agriculture commercialization and private sector competitiveness. The first thing there really is around increasing farmers' access to markets and quality inputs. This came up a lot in the consultations. There's just not the incentive a lot of the time for farmers to try and commercialize, and the risks involved are too great. So the improvement of storage, digital solutions, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, all critical in this regard. I think something that's just a perennial issue is increasing access to finance for firms, SMEs, farmers, different types of needs, including both now during the recovery, but also over the longer term. Thinking about options going forward. Need to strengthen land tenure security and institutions for land administration. I think this is quite a burning and hot issue, as well as reducing costs of doing business. Basically just continuing to make the business environment better. Strengthening agricultural research and extension services. I think what's important here is to say, the public provision or support to agriculture sector really needs to be maybe rethought. There's been a lot of provision of say, inputs, and there's been a sort of decline in research and extension services, which is critical, and I think the feeling from our consultations was that there is a strong need here. Promoting vertically integrated agri-businesses and developing small, medium-scale agro-industrial firms, huge potential there. Huge potential along the value chain, huge potential in terms of really talking to or speaking to Uganda's potential. And then finally, this sort of spatial strategy, looking at developing secondary cities and towns. I know there are these 3 corridors that have been spoken about across the southern, across from southeast up to northwest, and then down the western side. Again, it's to try and build on this, develop these secondary cities and towns so that there isn't this pressure on Kampala, and also that there's options for people in rural areas not to come to Kampala, but to really move into these secondary cities and towns, which would certainly help boost development. And final point there is also around improving sort of the value and diversity, both the products and markets for exports. So that's really, basically our take in terms of these 5 priority areas over the next 5 years, and then some proposed key actions. A lot of it you've probably heard before, but I think we've tried to capture it again, present it again, and highlight certain things and put a different emphasis. Hopefully you've managed to get onto the survey. Okay, that's it from the presentation. I think we'll go to the panel now.
Thank you, Richard, Franklin, Eva, for the presentations. And now the panel discussion, which will be moderated by Rachel Sevude, senior economist from the World Bank, and she will introduce the panel. So there'll be about, I think, 45 minutes of discussion and then 15 for the audience, both online and here to ask some questions or make some comments. Rachel, over to you. Thanks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to this session. I'll invite the panelists to come up and we start this session. I think we are still missing the CSO representative. Mr. Mukunda, yes. Yes, thank you very much. I hope you are comfortable in your seats. Yeah, I don't want to sit at the far end, so I'll stay standing because otherwise I might disappear into the poster. But welcome again to this session. I think we've had it all, and probably, you know, you've had the World Bank processes, you've heard about the developments, SCD, PLR, but in summary, it shows that the World Bank formulates a strategy of support to the country, but not in a vacuum, but rather through a process of consultation, of trying to identify what are the challenges and opportunities as well. And then at the end of the day, also tries to learn from the past. Because the World Bank has been here, maybe as old as some of us. It started in 1964, so it has been around, so the process of learning doesn't end. So when you hear these words like PLR, it is just in simple English, it is learning from the past, what has been done in the past. SCD is diagnosing what is happening in the economy and trying to identify what are the opportunities and challenges and how do we prioritize and go forward. But as you are aware, or as you have seen in the presentation, development is not governance and service delivery, human capital and women's empowerment, green growth, sustainable urbanization and resilience, agriculture, commercialization, and private sector competitiveness. But also the PLR, you know, okay. I understand you can't hear me without a mask. It has protected me heavily over the last 2 years, so that's why I keep it on. But I will remove it for now. So the PRR also told us that we are still aligned to the National Development Plan. It was developed even the current CPF or strategy for the World Bank is still aligned to the NDP3. But right now we are trying to look forward into the next strategy, if I may summarize. But remember one important figure that was also mentioned, the fact that World Bank support continues to be available. As of now, the panelists are going to talk about, but it's still available. And going into IDA 20, you have an additional $2 billion US. We should emphasize the currency because we've been talking about 4.8, and probably some of you thought it was shillings, but it's US dollars. So, let's open up the discussion. We have the panel, I'm going to introduce them, but we also have a bigger audience. We have an audience here, we have an audience online, so we want to have a discussion. As was mentioned by the country manager, the process involves consultation, and this is just the first one to go. On the panel, I'll start with Mr. Stephen, who is in the middle. He's representing the private sector. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Private Sector Foundation. He is well-learned and has a vast experience in private sector development. So we couldn't find any other to do a good representation of the private sector rather than him for the start. Then we have the PSST representative, Madame Maris Wanyera. She's representing government. The choice of the PSST is not because they have the money, but because that is the World Bank's first point of interaction with Uganda. So we first run to the Ministry of Finance, and then we sort out all the other things. She's well-learned, and she has a vast experience, I don't know, maybe over 30 years of public service and managing public resources. Then we have Mr. Mukunda, who is representing the civil society. This is a critical stakeholder. He comes from CISBAG, Chief Executive Officer, ED. The title is big, of Budget Advocacy Group. And he has very well learned too, and a wide experience in civil society, in economic development, in budget issues. And what we see in the budget today is probably on account of his work, especially on the transparency side. Then we have Madame Jordan Martindale, who is the team leader of growth, prosperity, and climate change at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, which we normally used to call DFID, DFID, of the UK government. She is well-learned and has a vast experience in development across the world, not just Uganda. So I will start off with my first question to Madame PSST. The figures that were highlighted, but that I also emphasized a little bit, show that not just the World Bank, but also many other development partners provide significant on-budget development assistance to Uganda, and this is through project financing. However, implementation remains slow and negatively affects the ability to meet development goals, not just of Uganda, but also of those who are providing the support. How can this be addressed? Madam PS. And on that question, the next one, I'll be seated down. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Rachel. Thank you, World Bank, and all the participants here today, and those online. Good morning. I'm called Maris Wanyera, representing the PSST, but I'm the acting director in the Ministry of Finance, in charge of data and cash policy. Yeah, the World Bank portfolio, as presented by Franklin this morning, he did mention that we are at about $4.8 billion, including commitments. And when we look at actual, what is on the ground, what we are implementing is about 3.8. That is sizable already. And in terms of disbursement, it is not something we can go home and talk about. 38 using commitment, about 45 using actual performance. It is still very low. And as I said earlier, we are not realizing the expected benefits in time because of this slow performance. What has contributed to this? It starts with the preparedness, the project preparedness. We've had across all portfolios, including the World Bank. We have cases where we implement projects that are not ready, projects that have not been well studied, and they have not been well designed. And because of this, we see slow performance because we end up with reviews of restructuring some of this project. We end up with redesigning during project implementation period. So all this has contributed to the slow performance of our projects. Then we also have an issue of RAP. RAP, this is where we have persons who are affected by having projects within their communities. This usually delay commencement of a project where it has not been concluded in time. I think I can give a good example that was in our media recently, where there was a tree in the middle of a road which had environment issues, and the owners were making noise, maybe rightly so. That alone affects performance. It delays implementation of a project. And this is affecting mainly infrastructure projects. In the energy sector, you need the right of way. You need to settle people first. You need to ensure you are not faulting on any environment requirements. It takes time for that to be concluded. Under the road sector, that is also the case. We're doing better when it comes to social projects, education, agriculture, because there is a reception by the communities, and we are using land that is not encumbered. So that also affects the implementation of our projects. We also have issues on contract management. Close follow-up of some of these contractors is not being done as expected. Some of the contractors are not fully mobilized, start slow on the ground, and that is affecting the implementation of our projects. It's affecting performance. Because of poor contract management, follow-up on the issues, not having the contractor fully mobilized, they delay the implementation. We also have procurement issues. Now, this one is more or less close to the RAP issues. Whistleblowers. You start a procurement in some portfolios, it can take you almost a year and even more to conclude a procurement. You start, somebody whistleblows. You have to go back and address that one, and then another one does. It is very common in road projects and electricity, energy projects. That delays project implementation. We also have approvals issues. Under procurement, also there are approval issues, delays both on our side and on our partner side because of the quality of documentation. Maybe that speaks to the capacity of the PIUs, the project implementation units. Some may not have the competency, much as they were hired with the assumption that they are professionally qualified, but the preparation of documents at times is lacking, and that also delays our performance. Now, we also have delays in our own internal approvals. We have a whole process of getting a project approved after the bank, in this case, the World Bank, if I can compare with their processes, after they have committed to their board, internally we have a lengthy process of having the projects approved. So to some extent, that affects our project commencement, and it delays implementation. Now, lastly, but not there are others that I may not mention here, the issues of social safeguards. Issues of social safeguards have really affected our projects delivery. Maybe because Ugandans, we are aware about our rights, which is very good, but also we are not aware that area, you don't know that that is also going to delay the delivery of the project because of maybe issues like some I don't want to mention here, but I'll limit myself to environment matters, use of quarries, for example, if they are not well secured, and there are concerns by communities, that can delay the whole process of implementing a project or commencement of a project. So those, among others, have contributed to the slow performance of our projects, and we are hoping that this can be addressed in the following ways. We are looking at how do we ensure that we are ready in terms of project preparedness. We have now put in place the public investment management system requirements, where a project will not be financed if it has not gone through the entire process. Prepare a concept note, a profile of the project, pre-feasibility and feasibility. And all these processes are guided and approved by the development committee. If your project is not approved by the development committee, we will not take it to financing, will not mobilize resources for financing. So that has been an area that has delayed us. Another area is to ensure that we are setting up, putting together resources to finance studies. That has also been a problem. As I said earlier, projects at times are implemented when they are not ready, and because there are no resources to do the study. So we are setting up a fund, more or less a fund that is going to support the financing of these studies. And we've called upon our development partners to support this cause so that we have a data bank of projects that are ready. When we need to invest, we don't have to again go back and go through the study process. We are also addressing issues of ownership. I think that has also been a problem, the ownership, the readiness of a project, where for some institutions, implementing agencies, they don't take interest in the design of the project. They bring the project for financing when they don't even have a good understanding of how this project is going to be implemented. So then it becomes a challenge in implementation. So the ownership issue is partly going to be addressed by the requirement of taking the project through the PIMS process, but also within the Ministry of Finance, we expect the sector minister discuss it, give them comments, we take it to the top management, and at top management it is political level. The responsible ministers who are going to implement the projects present these projects to the minister, to the top management of the Ministry of Finance, which is chaired by the Minister of Finance. So there has to be political ownership. And the process continues. The project has to be presented to the Vice President and the Prime Minister, again, by the respective implementing agencies. So that gives them that responsibility to make sure that their projects are known to them, they are comfortable with their designs, and that when it comes to implementation, will not have any major delays. The other issues that are concerning our internal approvals, like the Cabinet and the Parliament, we are fast-tracking that. There's a lot of improvement of recent, and we are hoping that there's not going to be any further delays in that area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, PS. That was very elaborate in terms of what are the challenges and how they can be addressed. But please keep your questions, keep track of the questions. We are going to come back to her, to Madam PS. But let me run quickly to civil society. You know, Uganda has this ambition of becoming middle income status, not just today, but it has had forever. But the low tax collections, as well as, you know, the waste and the delays that Madam PS has just been talking about, and the way the budget is managed, probably raise a number of questions. As a campaigner on budget efficiency, are you seeing any positive developments? Because as you've heard, she's talked about some measures that are being undertaken. Do you see any positive developments? And if so, give us some good examples, and also mention what more could be done. I'll give you 5 minutes. I allowed the PS more time because
Yes, thanks so much, Rachel. And again, thanks for the report. I think I'm on record. We participated in the consultations, and I'm glad that a number of our issues were coming up, especially, I think, the priority on governance, for me, speaks a lot. I think we have, as a government, a number of things, they have really tried to do a number of things, and positive ones. If you go on the taxation side, I think tax administration has improved, although we still have some of the things to do, especially now when we started digitalizing the taxation system. I think that is an area definitely we can put more investment and getting more returns. Transitioning to program-based, we have glitches, but I think for me is the principle. This principle is what we need to do. We can work on the glitches around program-based budgeting. Budget transparency, I think proud to say that there's a difference between accountability and transparency. But I think for me, on budget transparency, I think we can increasingly access information from the government side. Just having a website dedicated for budget information, I think, is a plus for government, that you can, access this information. Or just making a phone call and ask at how much have you sent money for Chiruhura district, and then somebody says, yes, we sent it, and this is the amount of money that Chiruhura district has used. I think that's commendable. On things that the government has done. But we could do better, really. We could do better. And I think for me, first of all, is let us invest more in delivering the service delivery itself, but also ensure that the service is delivered. Ensuring that what my PSST is talking about, ensuring that this road that is supposed to be constructed within 2-3 years is actually finished in time. That transmission line that is supposed to be able to take power from one place to another is completed in time. So we need to ensure that we invest in the delivery of these particular services. And for me, this service goes down to that health center, to that school, that medicines can be able to reach. And that when they reach, somebody is there to receive them, somebody is there to give them out. It is quite important and quite very critical. The other important element for me, I think, is to deal with leakages in the system. Just one way of saying, also need to deal with corruption seriously. Is that how can we ensure that that little money that has gone to district has actually reached and has done its right work and its right job, and that if it is stolen, we can be able to track that and recover it. And I think for me that's a big elephant in the room, and one of the things that is making us have our dream of a middle-income country. And I think it is coming to engage government and say, what you are providing is not right. Or if things go wrong, do they have the right platform to tell government and they think this is not going well before they are tear-gassed, for example? So I think we need to provide a conducive environment, Rachel. The cultural leaders. The question of accountability becomes very important. That if we entrust you to take us to a particular level and we have not, we should be...
Thank you very much. Yes, coalition, accountability, tracking the money, but also recovering it. I now want to rush quickly to Madame Martindale, and so that she the development partner community. Let's talk about green growth. It is one of the, one of the priorities that has been mentioned in the SCD. And climate change is already exacerbating the strain on Ugandan resources, natural resources, or even the financial resources already. What does invest in greater resilience in a country like Uganda look like to you? And where should the resources come from?
Thank you very much. So I'm passionate about green growth, and you may have seen me talking about this a number of times because it really is something I believe in. And in a country like Uganda, that's the 10th most vulnerable country in the world to climate change, it's something that we all need to be passionate about. We've got a soon-to-be-published nationally determined contribution implementation plan that's going to be coming out. And what does kind of increasing greater resilience looks like? It looks like implementing that plan. That is a plan that has been well developed with huge amount of expertise and stakeholder engagement. It looks across 13 sectors. And two key things I wanted to bring out from that. One is agriculture. It's a massive employer. It's a massive area of risk for the impact of climate change. So, and the other place was nature-based solutions, and the fact that actually Uganda has so much natural capital, and that needs to be protected. But the money is the key question, and that's the one that gets me even more passionate. Because where should the money come from? Uganda is the 10th most vulnerable country to climate change, cannot afford to do all of the adaptation that is needed. And it would not be right to look to Uganda to make those, that full investment. So it has to be a partnership. Now, some needs to come from Uganda, it needs to come from business, from government, from citizens, because we all need to be thinking about the impact of climate change in our lives and in our areas. And every investment must be climate smart, because it makes no sense to make an investment for today that is going to be irrelevant in 10 years because of the impact of climate change. But I'm pleased to say that, as you know, globally developed countries have committed to mobilizing 100 billion of climate finance per year by 2020. I say 2020 because it's been missed. We have not been making this target, but it's something that at COP26 we recommitted to. And the UK, we committed to doubling our international climate finance to $15 billion between 21 and 26. But, and I have another but, only 5% of climate finance is reaching sub-Saharan Africa. That is unacceptable. No one can look at this system and say that it's working. The money is not getting to the right places. So again, at COP26, countries committed to doing things differently. And we must step up to this challenge. And Uganda is. So Uganda has signed up to be a climate task force pilot country. Sounds very technical. And they've signed up to be a least developed country initiative for effective adaptation and resilience. Again, what do these things mean? It means about testing how we can get climate finance flowing into countries like Uganda, and how we can make sure it's flowing not just to central Ugandan government, but down to the communities that need it. And as the UK government, we're really proud to be working so closely with the Ugandan government on this. And there's three things that were identified at COP26 as key to doing things differently. One is alignment. We need to be aligned behind the national plans of the country. This needs to be integrated into the national planning, needs to be integrated into the budgeting processes. We need to be coordinated. You know, there are sources of funding coming left, right, centre. You cannot apply for all these different things. There needs to be a coordinated system. And it needs to be programmatic in approach, looking long-term and coherent rather than piecemeal project-based. So donors and countries have committed to doing things differently. Uganda is a pilot country for this. And in my role, I'm working with my levers. I'm working with the international, British International Investment. They have 3.7 billion to spend on climate finance. I'm working to get that money, so much of that into Uganda. But all of us need to be thinking, as donors in the donor community, how can we press our organisations to do things differently? But I need Uganda leadership and action on this. I look to Maris on this one. We need the plan published, because we can't mobilise finance without the plan, without the NDC. We need to work together to develop this pipeline of bankable projects. I have people lined up to invest, but we need the projects which are going to be able to deliver. And we need projects that are going to meet the incredibly important high standards to make sure they don't just get off the starting block, but they're actually implemented and they're actually making the difference. And we need to give the system no excuse not to be able to deliver now and at scale and in Uganda. So there's a lot we need to do. It has to be a genuine partnership, and we have to do things differently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do things differently. I think we need a lot of that in Uganda. Do things differently. But also in the international community, I think we've heard from Jordan that the targets were not met. So even in the international community, we need to do things differently. Let me turn to the private sector. And we talk jobs. Because all these things of middle income status, raising per capita income, and so on and so forth, with the way the population is growing, might actually not be realized without creating jobs. And Uganda had done well before COVID.
Yes.
But then not everyone had transited out of subsistence agriculture. A big portion still remained there, much as the transition had started. And then COVID just disorganized everything. But now, you from the private sector, what are some of the things that Uganda should do to return to an improved job creation agenda? And how can the quality of jobs be improved? Thank you very much, Mr. Sim.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and a very good morning to all of you, and thanks to the World Bank for this good interaction that is, I think is critical at this time. If you just look at some of the branding here, it just caught my eye that this discussion is a partnership for shared growth and prosperity. Shared. So in this room, we have the development partners, the World Bank institution particularly, the government, you have us, the private sector, and a big number of people listening in at the online. Just before COVID struck, we were operating at about 6% growth. And just in 2 years, we were hit by this catastrophe. And so we are working backwards to see how do we intervene. Now, I compare this to a medical situation where you have a patient who's in a very critical condition. So they take you to ICU, intensive care unit. And they bring in all these wires and blood, water, oxygen, etc. And then at some point you recover slightly, and they take you to HDU, the high dependent unit. And then from there they take you to something called close observation unit. So there are a series of recoveries based on how much intervention on this. But very quickly, my name is Stephen Asimwe. I represent the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, which is essentially an apex body of literally all the private sector. I'll just walk through the 12 sectors that we represent. And all of them have different interventionist requirements, so to speak. I'll start with the biggest one, which is the biggest employer, which is agriculture. And at PSFU, we look at agriculture, agribusiness, and forestry, and with its attendant ecosystems. One of the things that we quickly need to do in agriculture is to plan very well. Planning is critical. Infrastructure, market linkages, and of course, the need for us to critically plan over and beyond some of the vagaries of weather. Just before COVID, we were struck by something that really passed us, and that was foot and mouth disease. It affected livestock, it affected cows, it affected goats, it affected all the swine, poultry was hit. I mean, there was a very, very big challenge on that. And of course, the media, and now my background, Mr. Tabaire, is media, is we concentrated on COVID-19, the human side, but we missed this part, which was very critical. The quarantines hit us so badly. You couldn't move meat, you couldn't move eggs, milk, etc. And farmers suffered. They'd borrowed money. So when we, at Private Sector Foundation, one of the things we do is policy and advocacy. We do a lot of dialogues. When we engaged with the farmers, we noticed there was a disconnect between the planning groups. You had Ministry of Agriculture here, which had ceded some of the roles and responsibilities to Ministry of Local Government. They were not talking to each other. They were not looking at the financing element. And then you had a lot of disconnects from the agencies, NARO, NADS, and all of this. So one of the things that led to the somewhat breakdown was that because they were not talking to each other, there was no coherent planning, the system started to crack, and what we saw then eventually was countries in our neighborhood saying, we can't take this of yours, we won't buy this. So farmers suffered, they borrowed. So very quickly, we need to plan very well. And planning means everybody sitting in one room like this and saying, can we share this strategy together? Government here, development partners there, private sector here, civil society, media, which is very informative, what sort of message do you take out? And then we come up with a coherent plan. Now that's at the primary level. At the secondary level, we have issues of value addition. Raw milk goes for about anywhere between 500 to 1,000 shillings. Put a little bit of skim on that, and you have yogurt or milkshake. You get 3 times the value. Put in a little bit of context there, a bit of enzymes there, you have cheese. You get 5 times the value. We are depending on primary products at the expense of much, much bigger income-generating capacities. Same with coffee. Same with your average potato. Raw potato is 5,000 shillings a kilo. Make it into crisps, you get much bigger. If you add it and transform it into something else, for the same kilo, you get 5-10 times more money. We need to start being proactively looking at investing in value addition. Value addition means in technology, it means training, capacity building, infrastructure, markets, etc., etc. I'll give you an example. We've been trying to get into Europe to export our vegetables, our flowers, our fruits. We've done some pretty much good work. But at the time of planning and implementing, our principal airport, which is Entebbe International Airport, did develop a cold storage facility. The people who built it based on some average engineering designs. So when the planes came, the cargo planes came to offtake the vegetables, they found that actually you can't move the exports from the lower floor. The big planes are up there. So you need a conveyor system that basically takes the vegetables up to this point, put them into the feeding system of the plane, and it takes off. Now, all that is infrastructure. It's logistical. The planning was not well done because it was done by your average engineers. The exporters were willing to take these things on time and deliver, but just the logistical time frame which had been disorganized by the planning led to a lot of our export being denied entry into those places. So start planning, execution, ensuring that things are moving foolproof, financing these strategic investments will move us. Quickly, because of time, we have manufacturing. Again, it's logistical. We need financing for that. Now, once these industries are moving with the right kind of financing and the right kind of support, they will absorb more people. And manufacturing has been suffering again from some of the challenges on taxation. Right now, we are taxing some of our industries so hard that many of them are starting to move their factories to another country because of the unfavorable regimes. I think this is an area we need to work on, because if we do not intervene in that quickly, it's going to lead for a lot of our people investors, both local, by the way, including Ugandans. I know about 3 companies that have now moved to a neighboring country next to our border because it's cheaper to do business there and then re-export to Uganda using COMESA or East African community rules. So we need to really come to some of these things. In the last couple of weeks, and I want to thank the Ministry of Finance, we've started to have a discussion. I think now they have something called the PSD, Private Sector Department, which essentially is beginning to engage us a little bit more. But sometimes we engage, and some of these budget programs come through, and then they are hitting us very hard. So those are challenges that we need to work on quickly, because they affect productivity and inadvertently affect employment, and of course, earning from government, from taxation. So we have issues in ICT. ICT is a fantastic area. Our kids are brilliant. There are almost 50 universities right now. The kids are techno-savvy, but we still now have challenges on some of these blockages of, for instance, Facebook. Facebook has up to now been blocked. These young people do business. During COVID, there was a lot of IT work businesses taking place. Who was moving it? The young people. So when you block Facebook, and I think it was okay maybe to block it for a couple of days, but you don't block it permanently. I think some of these things need to be rethought. Things like the national backbone need to be spread. The cost of data, which goes back to planning again. Platforms, and thereby engage more jobs. Logistics and transport is a critical area. We need to move very fast on the standard gauge railway. We're moving slow. We need to fix this railway ASAP. The old railway we had, the Uganda Railway, which was built just after 1900, did a lot of work. They've moved it up to Isaka, which is now looking at Burundi, Rwanda, and the DRC, is now feeding into our system. I think we need to move very quickly. Even the current rail gauge is something. So infrastructure is necessary, it is fast. We have a logistics department. We have over 300 companies that are doing logistics. We can use this lake to move faster. Goods will be produced here. We have a fantastic neighbor who has just joined us. DRC, 100 million people, rich spenders. These guys are buying everything from Argentina and Brazil, yet we can manufacture all of these things here. So for me, it's policy, it is intervention. You have IHK, you have Kampala Hospital, you have all these places. A couple of years ago, people were coming to Uganda for treatment. So if we can invest more in the human resource, we have fantastic doctors, support our clinics, our hospitals, then we avoid people flying to other countries to do other treatments from there. I don't need to go very far from that. But for me, I think we need to be inclusive. We need to look at the shared system. But I'll end with 2 more, and this is a long topic, but tourism. I was former CEO of the Uganda Tourism Board. At the time I left in 2019, tourism was earning Uganda people. The more tourists you have, the more capacity is absorbed, the more they spend, the more they stay. So that's an area which needs to be engaged. And then lastly, this is the most exciting one, the creative sector. The creative sector, for me, is really the place to grow. It's been largely neglected, thought about as peripheral, but in the last couple of years, we have seen our music industry, our film industry, but also the creative space in terms of art, design. Just look around the room. Look at these things that are here. The biggest growth now for West Africa is in the area of textiles. They've now moved a policy where, for instance, in Ghana, they are saying parliament or public places, people are encouraged to wear Ugandan. I'm wearing a suit. 90% of everything I'm wearing here, actually 99%, is imported. Is it time that we can invest in our creative space, encourage parliament, government? I'm told in government you must wear a tie and a suit. Is it possible that we can encourage creative space so that we can start to absorb our textiles, our creative industry? For me, those are overriding issues. So policy, planning, resource support, allocation, and again, the shared growth and prosperity by discussing these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would have given you 30 more minutes, actually, because you can hear people also clapping. Because what you are talking about is where the rubber hits the ground. And without coordinating with the private sector, really, you can't do much. And the issues that you are talking about are very pertinent. But there is one particular issue I noted is the uncoordinated movement of troops. You have taxation issues versus promoting manufacturing. You have, you have a number of issues where you have, there is no coordination. So in the next one, because of time, kindly prepare your questions. We have, I think, an online audience. If there are questions there, please let's pick them up. And any questions here, please prepare as we hear from our last panelist. We'll take questions from you, then come back for their last round. Please reach. The World Bank's twin goals are ending extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity. I'm glad that it is all over the place here. Everyone can see it. Shared growth, prosperity. And the SCD speaks of addressing the inequalities of opportunities, which is pervasive in Uganda. How do you see this being done in this country? 2 minutes, because I think you a little bit touched on it in the presentation, but you can emphasize some of the most critical issues. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of time, but I think, I mean, I talked a lot about a few of these things in the presentation. I suppose in terms of addressing inequalities, the first thing I would think about is human capital. I mean, you saw that slide, that chart I showed at the end of 2021. 35% of kids were accessing any learning activity, but this dropped to 19% for the poorer households. Already there's a stark inequality there. Not having maybe the access to digital means, even power, poorer households are already set back. I think so. So investing in human capital and really trying to ensure that it's equal across the population is really important. Another area I would touch on or re-emphasize is women's economic empowerment. I think, yeah, I mean, a lot of people also ask me a question around how do you get back onto a higher growth path? And I think my answer here is often around just the first simple step is to ensure half the population has equal access or opportunity to be entrepreneurial, to contribute, to be productive. Already there's a boost, and I think this is also, just this as well would give a significant boost to inequality, improving inequality or reducing inequalities, improving equality, particularly with a lot of evidence how women, once they start progressing and improving and earning, how that gets reinvested back into the households, into the communities, and so particularly around women's economic empowerment across the spectrum. Yeah, I think another area important, which I think other panelists have touched on, is in the agriculture sector, the rural space. I talked about that spatial development, really trying to take away just the development centered around, say, Kampala and the corridor to Jinja and then down to Mbarara, trying to move that to the rest of the country. I think that's important for reducing inequality. And then also, I think just you saw that slide or that evidence around the shift from I guess there would be that shift away from agriculture and then a shift back into agriculture. So I think that there are these SMEs, these small businesses and enterprises which potentially were flourishing or budding prior to the COVID. And I think if you can really identify that space and support those kind of smaller businesses, which are often family businesses in poorer households, to try and really improve that lot, I think there's also scope for reducing inequality. And then the final thing I would emphasize is around, I mean, very specifically and directly around social protection. I mean, I mentioned the shocks and the vulnerabilities, this need for a more shock responsive approach to social protection. But not, I mean, I think the important thing is the work needs to happen up front in terms of identifying who is vulnerable, who is poor. I think what surprised us with COVID was actually initially those in the agriculture sector were fine. And it was actually this kind of urban poor working in service sectors which took the largest hit. And I don't think they were necessarily on any list in terms of they might need some sort of support. And I guess just some sort of resources to tide them over. And I think and that's another area where inequality could be addressed. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rich. Women empowerment, agriculture, small scale, small enterprises, and social protection. The work is cut out, but I think we need to do, again, we need to do things differently because these issues have been on the table many times, but we need to work on them more strongly and strategically. Questions, please. Bernard, could you help manage that? We can start with a gentleman right here. Please be very short, 30 seconds, if even less, if possible. Just say your name, where you're coming from, and the question, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Francis Kabuye. I'm from the Federation of Small and Medium Enterprises. Listening to the 5 priority areas, because you said they are aligned with the emerging trends in trade and other sectors, I think there's one key area that was left out, and I would pray that we include it. Currently, we have the emerging markets in the African Continental Free Trade Area, and we are experiencing a growth or an expansion in the EAC with new members coming in like the Congo. I would think that this is one key area that World Bank and maybe the government of Uganda, Ministry of Finance, should invest a lot of resources to support SMEs to participate effectively. Recently, we've been conducting an awareness and capacity building campaign as a membership organization together with PSFU and other members. And really, we've found out a lot of appealing products. Our members, our SMEs have a lot of appealing products. But there's a challenge on how they are going to enter or to penetrate the African continental market. So I think this is one area that needs to be addressed by World Bank. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Sarah Idenasimwe from the Uganda Revenue Authority. I'd like to make my contribution in regards to Richard's first presentation, whereby he said that one of the priorities of the World Bank to address unemployment was that the problem may not necessarily be the education, but probably our youth needs specialized training. And that brings me to, I would like to draw your attention to our huge informal sector that actually has a lot of potential for the youth. The Uganda Bureau of Statistics recently noted that 50% of our economy is under the informal sector. And as tax people, that's a problem that we are also grappling with, the huge informal sector. In the recent past, we've had support from the European Union as well as the USAID in regards to tax education, and that's one of the things that has supported us to increase our tax register to have a tax register growth in the past financial year of about 11.9%. So I'd like to implore the World Bank to consider supporting us as the Uganda Revenue Authority and Uganda at large in regards to tax education, supporting the formalization of our informal sector, as well as the taxation of our e-commerce. I would also want to mention something about our revenue performance. the East African Revenue Authorities Technical Committee notes that in the past financial year, 2019-2020 and 2020-2021, URA within the East African region, Uganda within the East African region, in fact, had the highest revenue growth. Whereas it's true that our tax to GDP ratio is still the lowest, is still low in the region, I still think that we are still making significant efforts in improving our revenue performance.
Thank you very much for the effort.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Revenue effort is needed. Another question, and Madam Maris will come back to the issues of revenue. Yeah, whether that effort is sufficient if we are still at 12% of GDP.
Thank you very
much.
much.
The next person, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to appreciate the development efforts the World Bank Group is extending to Uganda. My name is Faith Edigod Musementa. I'm a senior midstream economist and financial analyst at the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. I'd like to say that the oil and gas sector is transitioning into the development phase, and to date, over 3 billion has been invested into the sector. Now, to put that into perspective, the largest single investment in Uganda currently has been the Karuma with about 2.3 billion. And if you look at the figures that the World Bank showed us today, there's about 4.8 in debt on credit and grants, which is, so the 3 billion is about 60% of that. So this is to show you that the oil and gas project is a transformational project for Uganda. So to add, over the next 5 years, we expect over 10 billion to be invested in the sector. And so with this, I'd like to know, has the World Bank Group put into consideration the impact the oil and gas projects has on the economy, both directly and indirectly? And indirectly, it could be through the sectors, other sectors. And to even speak more about indirect growth, so far studies show that $1 directly invested in the oil and gas sector is expected to yield about 6 cents, which could translate to 21% growth of the GDP.
Thank you very much.
So does the World Bank also look to support in credit grants and other supporting resources to support the oil and gas sector? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question on oil. Is it a critical issue where the World Bank should come in? Rich, you will probably respond to that. Yes, there is a, yes, please.
Thank you. I must thank the World Bank about this. I'm from Ndeje University. My name is Dr. Mili Kwagaloyidu. I really appreciate that we, the academia, we are part of this, though we feel that there is a very big disconnect, especially when it comes to now policies being developed and even the funding. We have the public and we have the private universities in Uganda. Here we feel that if we are brought on board, especially because I heard that research is very important. This has been observed and we all observe this. We are doing research in universities, but are we directly now contributing to what our challenges nationally as required given the academia field? Because when you go to some of these developed countries, the academia contributes and feeds directly to some of the challenges and issues that these states or countries are going through. But why not here in Uganda? And in most cases when we talk, someone can even directly inform you that that is academics. So we really wonder, how do we support the academia to feed directly into the system, into our challenges in Uganda, in Africa? Because we had even a summit.
Thank
and
you.
It was in South Africa, but they were mentioning about the same.
Thank you very
How
much,
do we improve
Doctor.
this? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. That's a point well taken. Next question, please.
Thank you. I'm going to be very fast so I can use my 1 minute effectively.
Please.
My name is Jaco Beyeru. I'm the chairperson of the National Youth Council. So I have two quick questions. One's to Private Sector Foundation. The other can be shared by World Bank and the Ministry of Finance. The first is that the report notes very well that there is a mismatch between how fast our population is growing and how fast our real GDP per capita is growing. In that instance, are we having a viable tax taking a programmatic approach? Are we coordinating? And I think I forget the third, but core ideas, because climate financing here is a problem in sub-Saharan Africa. But climate financing here is supposed to address the people here. The benefit is to the people here first. So what are the people here, what are the institutions here doing in preparation for that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yagu. Yeah, maybe two.
Thanks very much. I'm Buswabal from the East African newspaper. Just a quick one to the World Bank and government. I mean, have you thought about investing in new strategic value chains within the agriculture sector and the services sector, which may actually add more weight to economic growth than putting money in expressways and dams that are actually causing unsustainable debt burden within Africa?
Online questions. Can someone check whether we have online questions? Okay. Two more questions on the floor.
Okay. Martin Luther, Nation Media Group. This question goes to Madame Maris. In your presentation, you gave us a very good smart of solving the problems of the projects. They were very good and very nice. Kindly help me know the number of projects you are dealing with right now in the country, development projects. Roughly, you could not have exactly, but roughly, how many projects, development projects, and why they have really stalled? Some have stalled, some you want to remove them. To go to, I forgot your name, but you mentioned something which was very interesting, and you said that, every investment must be smart. Okay?
We wanted just one.
Yes, hello. My name is Ali Twaha, and I work with New Vision. I was running through the report, and there's something I saw regarding the debt service projection that the World Bank made, that in 3 years, actually 55% of our total revenues will go to servicing debt. Currently, I think we are doing 30%, 30. Yes, 30. I just wanted to hear from finance. Does this really bother you?
Thank you for the straightforward question. Online question, please.
Can we have the online question? And I hope the panel is getting ready to, you've identified 2 or 3 questions that you can respond to. If it's not yet ready, we can go to, okay. I thought COVID had sort of pushed us to develop our IT capabilities.
So thank you so much for the World Bank for engaging us. The world globally is facing an acceleration of energy and food prices, which has an impact on the economy that has already been hit by COVID and struggling into recovery. What strategies does the project have to address such distresses in the economy?
Thank you very much. Who was that on the online? Naume? Okay, thank you, Naume.
And
okay, quickly, please.
Youth skilling in specific sectors and value chains should be prioritized. They should be as well aligned to assessments from relevant bodies by DIT, especially prioritizing the enterprise-based skilling approach to curb unemployment of youth. That's more a comment.
Thank you very much.
That one's from...
Okay, thanks a lot. There was one particular question as the panelists are getting ready. From Mr. at the front. He kept, yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Fred Ngavirano. I'm from Ministry of Gender. I'm the acting director for social protection for the moment. My question goes to Madam Alice and Richard. It's exciting to see the cities coming up from the southwest to the northern to the eastern, but the problem, these cities are choking with garbage. And in the papers we read where the mayors, the town clerks are saying they can't manage garbage because in view of the Public Finance Management Act, they cannot spend on source the local regulated revenue. So Madam Maris, how do you reconcile that missing link between the well-intended intention with support from World Bank and the contradictions within the fiscal decentralization as far as revenue collection and expenditure is concerned in view of our national decentralization policy? The last one is on human capital development. I recall 1998, I was already in service. World Bank had a very wonderful program, Nutrition and Early Child Development, which covered 36 districts. By then, we were less than 50 districts. Now, when you look at the stunted growth rate, when you look at our demographic surveys, UDHS, what we are seeing, it's stunted population coming up. How do we convince government? And I'm happy the budget advocate is here. I always like the way you advocate. We are missing a point. We are not investing in the 0 to 8. So how do we get back to the agenda of investing in our early childhood if we are to really reap dividends in years to come, basing on what we saw as positive results of 1990s investment in early childhood. And that one is linked to focusing on revamping education primary after COVID, not forget, without thinking about those who are between 3 and 8 years in terms of early education. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much you've been a great audience. I want to pass back the mantle to the panelists. I wanted to start with, let me start the other way around with Madame Martindale, so that you can respond to some of these issues on climate. Yeah, as you had the questions.
Thank you very much, and I will be brief, which you'll be pleased about. So, really good questions on climate finance and where the money should be invested. So, I think actually the report is really good at highlighting the key areas, so have a look. And also, I'm really looking forward to the NDC plan being published. But I think there's three things I would focus on. One is agriculture, because it is so vulnerable. One is infrastructure, because the infrastructure we're investing in needs to be able to last. And the third one is information to enable individuals, business and government to be able to make the right decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then to Mr. Simwe, I think there was also this question about the oil sector investment and its importance, but maybe you could connect it to the job agenda. The oil sector investment,
right,
and how it is seen. Should it be a priority? But in this discussion, I think maybe you could connect it to the job agenda. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a good question. The oil and gas sector is one of the best opportunities we have. We've been having discussions on this final investment decision. There's anywhere between $15 to $20 billion of opportunities in everything: infrastructure, leisure, agriculture. Everybody can actually plug in. And I think that's an area we need to quickly move in. But let's look at it from a much bigger context. If you look at Uganda's exports right now, our biggest export right now is minerals. Yes. Well, from here and East Africa. But let me tell you, at PSFU, we have a sector of oil, gas, minerals, and extractives. Huge. If you drive to sections of Mubende, Bitiana, all the way to the west, you find close to hundreds of thousands of people involved in artisanal mining. Now, again, for me, I'm a big, big believer in value addition. When you get an ounce of gold, you get anywhere between, again, because of the ecosystem, you find these dealers really paying our people paltry amounts of money. But that's because we don't have an organized system. And we have answers to that as private sector foundation. So if we invested in this fantastic opportunity, the amount of money that stays here would be fantastic. And that means infrastructure and all the ecosystem supporting facilities around. So for me, if we can create that, and I learned to thank government for the refinery that was put in Entebbe, because then it added more money for us to get to the point that now even the neighboring countries found a much better, return on investment if they brought it here. And we have literally a huge portfolio of minerals, not just gold. We have uranium, we have all these other things. So I want to look at a situation where in the next 5 years, we come together and plan strategically. At the private sector have a lot of solutions, and I know that there are, of course, constraints in government, and that's where the development partners come in. We have huge opportunities that can be harnessed, integrated in our planning, and again, that shared growth and prosperity comes into place. So over and beyond the traditional, agriculture, this and this and this, there are new areas that have, for us, as far as we are concerned, growth opportunities. Creative sector, I just mentioned it. So things like water transport, marine services. This lake we are sitting on here, Lake Victoria, has $40 billion GDP capacity. And there are ideas. We have good policies. We have written good things. I think let's start to debate some of those things that we have left out. Necessity is the mother of invention. Right now, that war in Ukraine and Russia has brought logistical problems. cooking oil is now at its highest. Indonesia and Malaysia have said we are not exporting anymore. We want to use it for ourselves. Northern Uganda is a vast opportunity for us to grow sunflower, simsim, soya. The land is flat. If we invest in that place, 3 months, we will be a net exporter of vegetable oil. Those are the things we want to start looking at. And so I think this discussion is work in progress. I think the minds are out there, and I think this is the best time to start discussing these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that ties in well with, I think, Rich, on the issues of recovery. You know, how do you see, how can Uganda recover from, I think there was a question on that issue. Quickly, on recovery, how do you see Uganda recovering from the current, shocks, especially from COVID and now the new Russia-Ukraine issues, moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the recovery and where things are going, look, I think what the panelists have mentioned have covered quite a lot of that. I mean, I think particularly Stephen mentioned a lot of ideas to try and get this private sector going, which for me would be one of the first things to really focus on. You can see what was hit by COVID. A lot of these kind of small enterprises, small businesses, there's certainly a need to put that as at the center of this recovery, to get these businesses back on their feet, get people back into those jobs. I think that's critical. And that also then comes down to sort of these perennial issues of financing, trying to sort out the access to finance issues which have been going on for a long time. Continued effort to improve the business environment, making it easier for these enterprises to run and to, I suppose, invest ultimately. So I think I would say that's the first thing. Maybe step back slightly, I would also say, I don't think we've talked much about it, but I mean, I mentioned in the presentation, but in terms of the recovery, the COVID prevention is still critical, and the vaccination program is still critical as well. I think government has done well in its approach there, but I think it's important to keep on track and on target there. I think also we've spoken about the macro fiscal situation. The government has committed to a program now to improve fiscal and debt sustainability. It's important to stay on that program. Certainly if you look at what's happening in the rest of the world, countries are moving up. A lot more countries are at high risk of debt distress, defaulting. That has huge amounts of implications for those countries in terms of longer term investment environment, socio-economic issues on the ground. So certainly I think that needs to be a focus. I seem to always come back to this issue of human capital development. Again, I would say that's also critical as part of the recovery. You saw just that one chart around the learning lost. That has to be addressed quite fast. And again, I'd emphasize the point of women economic empowerment. Rachel, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind just mentioning one other thing. There was a question here. Yeah, I mean, two maybe, just on I think coming back to a point Stephen made and this gentleman here mentioned about the tax incentives. Perhaps there's too many of them, and I know this is close to your heart, so I'll mention it. But I think, look, Stephen, I mean, I agreed with everything you said. I thought it was great, and I really liked your point on the creative industries. But I think this point around taxes being too high, and that's chasing businesses away, I couldn't agree with that. I mean, I think a lot of the evidence we have shows that businesses are more interested in other things: constant power supply, decent roads, a competent, say, productive workforce. I think tax incentives and that are really on the margins. And you can see, I mean, you mentioned that's something also to consider, but you can see the data. I mean, the revenue take of Uganda is much lower than other countries. And a lot of the issue is just too many exemptions. So I just wanted to reflect on that. And one tiny little point on the oil sector, just to say, I mean, the whole thrust and message of this report in many ways, well, on one hand, is that we recognize that there's this oil sector coming. But what we propose here is that the economy and Uganda as a society has to actually get ready for it. And getting ready is not just thinking it's going to solve everything, but actually to ensure that institutions are strong enough to manage it, but also that the economy is diversified enough and strong enough in other areas so it doesn't sort of lead to other issues that you've seen in other oil exporting countries, where you have the agriculture sector dies, other industries die, issues of inequality go right up, there's still poverty exists. So it's just to be clear that we don't put a lot of emphasis on the oil sector here, but we acknowledge that it's coming, but that the country needs to be ready. And also that's also why we elevated the issue of green growth and environmental issues, which need to be carefully managed with an oil sector. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Rich. On that, I think we go to the CISPAC.
Yes.
I wanted to request him to respond actually to that issue of tax incentives, taxation, tax effort. What do you think? Quickly.
Yes,
and then we'll
think
go to the ministry.
Yes, I think. I mean, tax exemptions definitely is a debate. I mean, and I agree with him is that in most cases, really companies, tax exemptions really is a list of their tax is a list of their concerns. There are those other fundamental issues that companies would want. But the geography in which we are situated, makes us vulnerable really to splash all these intensive incentives around. To the level that if you don't provide it, probably Kenya is going to do it, maybe Tanzania is going to do it, and all others. But I think the major issue around tax exemptions is around tax governance. How do we govern these exemptions? How do we regulate them? If I come with $1 million, which kind of incentives am I getting? If I come with $100 million, which kind of incentives I'm getting? But again, if I'm given these incentives, how am I monitoring these incentives? Because with incentives, government is providing you something for you to also to bring in something. If I promise bring $100 million and end up being a chapati investor, I mean, somebody really must come up and say, look, at this particular point, you've not fulfilled the obligations. And I think for me that is lacking and lacking enough. So we need to strengthen the monitoring of these exemptions. Rachel, my last point I want also to mention is that we need, and I think as a bank, you also need to get interested in this. The whole idea around service delivery value chain financing. Because if you wake up and say that the judiciary, we're going to provide you with all the instruments, all the facilities, increasing your salaries, give you the facility that you need to deliver justice. Because an ordinary person like me, I'm interested in that service, justice. But you forget about that this policeman who needs to arrest a criminal, he has no fuel. That the investigator, criminal investigation department, they don't even have a camera to take on the exhibit, neither the papers to write the statement. The prosecutor, they can't even, travel to the scene and find out what exactly is happening. Justice will never be delivered. So I think it's critical that as government, that we support our government to think through that and say, if you want to deliver this service, a number of things must also work along the way. And I think that is where we can be able to get our dream of a middle-income country. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Julius. And now we turn to the PS. I'm going to leave you to choose, because some of them were really pointed to the ministry, but kindly come back.
Okay. Thank you very much for all the questions that have been raised. And I also want to thank Richard and my brother for having addressed the tax issues. And I just want to say that actually government is open to dialogue, and it has been shown in terms of the whole budget calendar process. There's always open dialogue, there are discussions about the tax issues, the service deliveries, where you can have an input and you can contribute to that improvement. So I will not dwell much on that because there were other questions that had been raised. And I want to maybe first start with the one on whether we are taking care of the petroleum industry, the oil and gas industry, as we look at its contribution to growth. I think that is already being done. It is actually one of those key sectors that we think are going to support our growth. Now, Richard explained to the detail about it, in the need to diversify, but I just want to give you assurance that in terms of measuring the future growth, not now, and now we have the indirect contribution to growth coming from the sector, but there are bigger investments coming in the future, and that is being taken care of. And also the kind of investments that have been made to prepare, especially for that area, apart from diversification, to ensure that the economy will not go into an oil disease. That there's oil disease and then there's the curse. The Dutch disease and then the oil curse. To avoid the oil curse, that area, the Albertine region, ends up not benefiting much. I think you've seen the level of investments that have been made there. Now, if I just speak to what, since here we are being hosted by the World Bank, I speak to what the World Bank has done there, supporting infrastructure, the fiscal planning in that area, under the Albertine, I know it as ARSDP project. They are doing, supporting the institutions, vocational institutions, or those technical institutions, you pick, and the other one there's a bursaries for the students or the youth hailing from that area who are going to be benefiting from those facilities. Beyond that, even the Public Finance Management Act provides for how that area is going to be benefiting from the oil resources. So there is really clear, deliberate interventions by government to ensure that we don't suffer from both. And maybe that takes me to the issue about whether we are just focusing, from my friend from the East African News. Yeah, are we focusing just in investing in infrastructure and forgetting about supporting agriculture and the value chain? I think of recent you may have noted that ever since the COVID, we started having these effects of COVID on the economy. Government has gone in a big way to support the agriculture sector. Agro-processing, not necessarily production, but then the value chain aspect. Putting in a fund that is being managed by the World Bank to support small and medium-sized enterprises, especially those in the agricultural sector. Of course, it's not limited to them, but they're being given the focus. In addition to the agriculture finance credit, which is already being managed by the Bank of Uganda. We have the famous and the new one, the PDM, which is also going to tackle the same people in the sector. I think you've been following this of recent, and you've seen all the leadership being very much involved in this. Again, under the World Bank program, Franklin earlier on indicated the portfolio. We have a good project coming up, Invite, which is also going to have special funds for small-scale and medium-sized enterprises. So I think we are not forgetting that we need to do more in other areas. But you know, you need infrastructure to move from one place. Infrastructure in terms of roads, you need to do that. Industrial development, you need the power. So you cannot do away with that, but you can also improve and increase focus in these are the value chain kind of enterprises. Then I'll go to the question of, are you worried about debt service? I think we should first look at the media. My brother, the ED, PSFU, said at times the media, you tend to focus on some things and then you kind of don't show the actual. What has this money brought here? What have we benefited from this money? To start with, we have Karuma as an example, generating power. Very soon it will be already supporting industrial development, but it will support even more in the future. We have Expressway We are now enjoying, we have all these roads that can connect us from any corner of the country. We have hospitals, we have schools, we have all these other result of what you are now saying. Do you care? Are you worried? And why are we as worried as you are? But we are putting in measures to address that problem. We have the domestic revenue management, domestic revenue mobilization strategy. The government is looking at how best can we increase our tax revenues. We are also now, earlier on we said, let's not do the usual. We are looking at options of accessing other forms of financing. We've come up with a public investment financing strategy. We are going to tap into this climate funding. We are going to tap into other options of financing other than relying just on debt and tax revenues to diversify our sources of financing. So we believe that with that, we are going to see a reduction as we also look at debt management. We actually, with the support of our development partners, looking at how do we manage this debt in a way that it does not become a problem. And that's why Uganda, we are still within check, by the way. We can service this debt. Of course, we are mindful that as it increases, it may be a problem. But we are managing it, and we are very as concerned as you are, but we are also aware about what kind of investments have benefited this nation across all the sectors. So the other question was how many projects, or how many, was it projects, do you have, development projects? What I can tell now offhand is that for externally funded projects, we have more than 75. Those that are on the ground, more than 75. But if you include what government is also investing projects. Then, if I still have time, I want to talk about climate financing. What are we doing about it? I will not repeat what Jordan said in terms of government's commitment. We are committed. She mentioned what we are doing in terms of NDC, our commitment in the COP26, right? Yes, what we committed to do as a country. But as a Ministry of Finance, our partners, and Jordan here who's passionate about climate financing, they're supporting us to set up a unit at the Ministry of Finance. This unit is going to help us to now make sure that we get that money that Jordan will support us to access by coming up with good projects, bankable ones that can be financed. And also we are doing climate finance tracking within the budget. We need to know how much have we put in as government in this particular sector. So in terms of what else are we doing, we've put in a lot of resources for irrigation, solar-powered irrigation schemes, the construction of valley dams, all these areas that can help us to really be able to adopt to the new norm because of this climate change. Now, I was given a free ticket, so I'm choosing. Okay, 1 minute. I think I will not respond to those that have already been responded to. Maybe just giving assurance to Ndeje University. I think we are all, you were talking about the National Development Plan. It is National Development Plan. It's not public. So both government and the private sector are contributing to realizing our vision. As universities, you're doing research. Research is really key and necessary. And I think, again, I come back to our host. They're already supporting us in there's a project which is looking at centers of excellence, where they're supporting about 4 universities in doing research. And I think one of the benefits, for those who may not know it, COVIDX is a result, COVIDX. Yeah, is one of those benefits we have seen from the support that we have received from the World Bank in supporting research And I think we are still discussing with them to see how best can we help other universities in this case. We are partnering with other universities too, like one of the projects that is yet to be taken forward, the support to women enterprises. We are going to partner with MOOBs. So we need you to be partners to supporting the development programs of Uganda. I think I'll stop at that. No, just one. My brother from Gender, I think when I presented earlier on the challenges of project implementation, the reasons for delays, I talked about the problem of ownership. And that is, when you don't know what you're doing, you tend to forget what other policies are there that are going to affect your performance. So we expect the ministries and the local governments who are doing, for example, USMID, to talk and understand what are these other policies that may affect us. How do we make sure that if we are doing the roads, we'll be able to clean the mess that comes with the urban development? So we need projects that are designed by those who are going to implement them, but they also have to do it in a very consultative manner. So that's another thing that we are trying to tackle, so that tomorrow Mr. Ngabirano will not say, you implemented a project in Kampala, but you didn't take care of the West. We need the Kampala Capital City Authority to make sure that it is talking to all those other stakeholders and deliver a project that covers and addresses all that may be leakages. So I will stop at that.
Thank you very much, PS, for that elaborate response to almost all the questions. I wanted to call upon the country manager. I know you are going to give remarks, but just in this panel to respond to a few issues, especially the last point that she's been referring to, because beyond project management, there is this bigger issue of sustainable urbanization and what the World Bank is thinking about that. Then there is the issue of skilling, which connects directly to the human capital priorities that you are talking about, that was raised by URA about skilling and where to focus. And then the connection to academia in terms of research when you're undertaking policies. Those three, and then we'll be able to close. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And on urbanization, let me just quickly say that that has quickly expanded to become the largest portion of our portfolio, because we recognize the challenges that many of the municipalities have had and continue to have, I think, such as the one you're raising, and which will require us to continue working with the Ministry of Finance to find ways to ensure that the policy inconsistencies that bar them from delivering services are addressed. So we have the GKMA, as was mentioned earlier, Greater Kampala Metropolitan Area project, but I think the one that you're more familiar with is USMID, or the Urban Services Municipal Infrastructure Development, which is covering, I think, 18 municipalities, 22 now, and has done quite a lot in terms of at least the road infrastructure, but also expanding to the other infrastructure sectors as well. So we consider, with the population growth rate in Uganda, that the urban areas are going to need to be assisted to get ahead of the curve, because as this population growth happens, if they're not ready to receive the population in terms of physical development, in terms of road and other infrastructure, whether sewers, water supply, electricity, the problems will become more aggravated, and the opportunities for generating growth in terms of, for example, facilitating the enterprises that we heard about, small and medium enterprises, and absorbing the youth that are either coming out of universities or requiring skills will be problematic. So urban is a big priority for us going forward from that perspective, also because it aligns with the government's NDP3 objective of industrialization, that industrialization is typically linked to urbanization, and therefore making sure we have that in our minds and in our plans is important. The skills angle, I think, is going to be critical. We're just completing now a skills project and have been discussing with government potential for continuing to expand in that area. So beyond our current support for education, both secondary and primary, looking at skills more specifically that will allow even those who have come out of college to move into enterprise and be more agile in their ability to create jobs for themselves is also important. So skills development is something that we're working on with the academia, with the university network, both vocational and technical colleges, as well as looking at what can be done by the universities themselves to ensure that they're refocusing the education of today on the jobs of the future, which we see are going to be more in the digital space and requiring different skill sets as well. So I think those were the two questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Importance of research in policy.
Yes,
Yeah.
so I think that that's an important point that you made about the link to academia. And I think that it's time for us to maybe, again, inform decision-making by cabinet and parliament. We have had good experiences in other countries, and I think there's already some effort going in that direction now through the creation of centers of excellence, such as the one that was just set up in Makerere on public investment management. So I think there's another one which is being developed around environmental and social side, but also on implementation. So I think it's starting to happen, but perhaps we need to have a bigger engagement where we have a dialogue around this between government, development partners that are supporting government and academia, because it is important that we do the research with those who have the knowledge involved. So could I just say one last thing on the question of the oil, as Rich said, the fundamental infrastructure that was put in place through the Albertine project that Maris spoke about, but also the focus on other related sectors. Forestry, we've just launched a project which is going to also be in the Albertine region to ensure that the forests that are degraded are now replaced and regenerated. I think those are supporting environmental interventions that will be important for the recovery and the sustainability of the region that is going to be producing most of the oil. Similarly, there are other projects that are going to focus on agriculture and again in that region to make sure that food is available for the large number of people who are expected to be part of the oil sector. So the intervention of development partners will be, as Rich said, in multiple areas, just in supporting the overall economic development of the country, as opposed to necessarily direct interventions in the oil sector, which is already being supported by the private sector and the government.
Thank you very much, CM, for joining the panel to respond to some of the questions. At this juncture, I want to express gratitude to the entire panel here and for your response to the questions, and also to the audience that has been so productive and interactive. Thank you very much. I want to hand over to the MC to take us through the next stages. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rachel, and members of the panel for the important discussion on important development issues. So we are bringing this to the conclusion with closing remarks from the country manager, but she'll also present the survey results and talk about the next steps in relation to the country partnership process.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you to the panel for the very rich discussion, the audience for the questions, and I think overall we're really excited to have inputs already starting to flow into the process of preparing our next country partnership framework. So as you can see, we have developed a set of 3 overlapping selectivity filters, which we are going to be applying to the discussions we have around the country partnership framework to help us to choose where to engage. And you can see that we have already identified through the presentations earlier Uganda's development priorities and regional dynamics, also our corporate goals and priorities. And today we have already started to engage you in identifying what the bank's comparative advantage will be in terms of where we should intervene and help with the priorities government is putting forward. And so out of that selectivity filter, we will generate the objectives of the country partnership framework. And maybe one point to make is that we are now starting to use a much longer horizon when we set the country partnership framework. You cannot achieve most of the types of things we do with government in 5 years. Typically, you'll need at least 10 years to get there. So we have realigned our framework within the bank across all our countries to take a longer-term view on how we engage. So let me quickly turn to your first inputs to us. And the first question was on what the World Bank's comparative advantage is in terms of macro fiscal stability. And as you can see in blue, the majority of you felt we could be instrumental in helping to strengthen budget processes, credibility and compliance, but that was closely followed by enhancing public investment management and procurement. The other 2 not being unimportant, but perhaps just showing where the focus of this particular audience is. Secondly, the bank's comparative advantage with respect to governance and service delivery. Majority of people felt that improving local government service delivery, I think this talks to the point which was made about helping the local governments to deliver on solid waste management, that is seen as the top area for bank intervention, followed by enhancing institutional capacity, including digital usage. So this is GovNet program that the government of Uganda is rolling out. And then the third question is the comparative advantage with respect to human development and women's empowerment. And for that, the promotion of technical vocational training for youth and women was the most highest ranking priority. So I think aligning with some of the suggestions that came out from yourselves again today. Secondly, public health, education, and water supply, which is the human capital development agenda again. So I think veering much more towards the key sort of foundational issues for development. And then the last point, I believe, was about green growth, sustainable urbanization, and resilience. And here, prevention and reversal of degradation, deforestation, and wetland destruction came out as the top one, followed very closely by implementation of environmental policies and laws, but not leaving too far behind the investments in road maintenance, rural, urban roads, as well as trade corridors, and the improvement in urban policies, planning, and capacities. So I think those are just the highest ranking in this audience priorities where you see the bank's comparative advantage being leveraged. So as was said at the beginning of the presentation, we are going to have to be selective, and I think that selectivity will also require government to tell us what they are planning with our development partners so that we spread ourselves to cover as much ground as possible. So there was one last one, which was agricultural commercialization and the private sector competitiveness. And the two top items there, number 1 and 2, which were increasing farmers' access to markets and quality inputs, and increasing access to finance for MSMEs, of which we know a large number are farmers, came out on top there. So again, this aligns with what Rich had said about not disaggregating the agriculture sector from the private sector, because the two need to come together well in order for us to make the best out of the country's key drivers, especially the agriculture sector. So that is it on the points that were brought up for your view today, which is basically of the priorities in the SCD, where does the bank have the biggest potential to contribute. So the last slide here just shows you the timeline for us preparing the country partnership framework. At the moment, we are at the point where we have launched in April, May. This is the first block. The country, the SCD and the PLR launched today. We've started the consultations for the country learning review. And we've also, just a few weeks ago, had the country portfolio performance review with the government, which looks at the entire portfolio, the $4.8 billion, and tries to see what needs to be done to improve it. The PS representative today, Maris, went through the points that she thinks are most important in getting that money to flow. So I think we're making good progress there. Beyond that, the draft of the country learning review, which brings to an end the CPF, in other words, the final report that says this is what happened in the country partnership framework for 2015 to 22, will be completed in June, July. In August, we'll launch the CPF consultations. We'll have a draft package for final review by October. And in November, we hope to submit the country learning review and the CPF, the country partnership framework, to our board of directors for approval. So that's the timeline right now. It may adjust outwards depending on how we feel the process is going. We want to make sure that we're more inclusive in the consultations. And so if that takes a bit more time, we will adjust accordingly. So I think that is the last slide. And I can say a big thank you again to all of you for joining us in person or online today, and to the organizers of the event, to the panelists for engaging us in a very fruitful discussion and dialogue. And I want to just end by saying that this is the beginning of the end of one process, but the beginning of the next country partnership framework. So we look forward to seeing more of you in the coming months and to a useful output generated by December this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukami, the country manager, World Bank, Uganda. Thank you to the audience online and the audience in here. And mine is simply to deliver some good news for the people in here, not for the people online. For the people in here, lunch is served. Just go out in the corridor, serve yourself, and come back in and have some lunch. So please do the lunch, don't leave the food behind. Thank you all, and have a great afternoon.